Because if it all looks the same structurally, then it's mostly like a moderation thing versus like it's something about the shape of this architecture that like helps to drive people into madness or something. Like the moment I knew that that business was cooked, we never made, to be clear, we never made a single individual human dollar off of building all of it. The takeaway from when I did the pitch was they said, wait, you can automate breaking CAPTCHAs? I need to show my team that product. Give me the API details for how you automate CAPTCHAs, because I need to make sure that we automate CAPTCHAs, because that's a big problem at our business. This custom feed, this humble custom feed affordance on this platform is actually like a backdoor for a global reorientation of the attention economy.
We get to choose what we want to do. We don't have to take the path that Meta wants for us. 3-8 interviews are back, and today we're joined with Devin. Devin, where does the podcast find you?
Oh God, between finishing this podcast and going on a bike ride, it's 70 degrees today in Portland. It's like the beginning of maybe the not false summer. So that's immediately top of mind, is going outside for the first time in 6 months. And gosh, running this company Graze that I've been running for about a year and a half now, building feeds, rewiring the attention economy, and thinking a ton about my relationship with agents. Yeah. We gotta go wherever.
So just another day.
Yeah.
I hear you though. I'm a little bit motivated to end this early because I also want to go outside on a bike ride. It's really, really nice today. Maybe give folks a little bit of a background on Graze, what that is, and why you decided to get that rolling.
Sure. Maybe I'll give you like the quick elevator pitch of who I am. I'm Devin. I've been an engineer for just about 20 years. I started my career here in Portland as the one intern at like a then 4-person company called Instrument, which continues to be a digital agency. They've since been bought up by a larger digital agency, but I think there's like hundreds of people there now.
Yeah.
I like to joke that like the other path that wasn't traveled in my career was simply just not doing anything other than being the intern at that company and just working I would have already exited or something, right?
Intern for life. I love that title.
Yeah. The restlessness of maybe I should investigate all these other forking paths all the time. But anyways, yeah, I started in Portland Tech about 20 years ago, did a bunch of school. Half my career's been in academia, half of it's been in industry. The industry background is the pipeline of full stack to back end to machine learning and predictive modeling stuff. I've been pretty well ensconced in machine learning stuff since probably 2014, 2015. And then on the academic end of my work, I came up during Web 2.0 and the platform era, the early platform era, where we believed that everyone was going to have a cell phone in their pocket and that was going to liberate all of us. And being a literal child, I was taken by that theory of a technologically deterministic utopian future. And so spent a bunch of time. My sort of intro for academic work was, if we have all of this trace data about human beings out in the world existing and making commentary about their existence, it provides the substrate for us to ask questions, like quantitative questions about like different sort of group processes that we couldn't get at before, particularly like in like political science, sociology and comms studies, right? How does information move between people? How do people adopt belief? How does a political movement occur? These are sorts of things that we have prior to the last 20 years, we had theories on how that stuff happens in these like amorphous, large scale, million scale, but they were only like rough ideas that we couldn't empirically test, because you can't ask a million people, how'd you find out about the news? You can get at it in these other ways. And it was very low fidelity before, right? And so got very into how do we measure these types of things? How do we measure relationships between people online and how those change and evolve? I did most of and then dropped out of a PhD focusing on how do people get into the things that they are into online? How do processes of socialization occur within online spaces? How do you quantitatively measure the processes of attachment to community for a person? And can you measure the belief structures within people similar to epidemiological disease spreading models, like of how people sort of like transit in and out of community? And so did a lot of work on that stuff. 2018, I finally moved back to industry permanently and had a day job, whatever, but got into a lot of misinformation stuff because, you know,
Seeking and not creating, right?
yeah. So it's one of the questions is like the doctoral work was like, how do people filter into these toxic communities and how do we prevent like the emergence of large scale toxic communities? Does a toxic
Right.
hate group online, if you strip out the content and the valence of what they're talking about, does the communication patterns and structures look the same as like getting into the Seattle Seahawks, or does it look
Right.
different? Because if is it like, is there something about, to be really flippant about it, bad behavior online? Is there something structurally different about it or not? Because that has sort of like downstream, effects in terms of how do you design systems to be safer? Because if it all looks the same structurally, then it's mostly like a moderation thing versus like it's something about the shape of this architecture that like
Yep.
helps to drive people into madness or something,
And
right?
it's kind of that nature versus nurture argument too, right?
Yeah.
It's like, is it how much of it is just kind of there and they've discovered themselves and now formed a group versus are people brought in? Are they, some would say indoctrinated or at least drawn to the messaging or what other attributes they identify with as part of that?
Yeah, or it's we don't really have a sense of like the civic space that we are creating as engineers, and like
Right.
are these safe streets or not in some sense? Are we building these online spaces to be pro-social inherently or whatever? There was a lot, I was really interested in a lot of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It was, to borrow a parlance, it was very black pilling work to be involved in 2014 to 2018 for reasons you can probably suss out. But
For international folks, there was an election cycle.
I got into misinformation stuff because it's a lot less fraught, right? Like
Right.
coordinated inauthentic behavior is bad no matter how you frame it. There's
Yeah.
no,
People call it fraud in other industries as well.
yeah,
Right?
exactly. So I had a day job and it was at a fact checking nonprofit building software to help journalists, like health of the internet stuff. Through line of my career is health of the internet, right? Yeah, how do we make the internet a healthier place for human beings? And let's see here. I knew that I wanted to start my own thing. I knew that I wanted to find like a meaningful contribution, not just sort of like cynically, you know, find my
Yeah.
place to, get rich quick or something. And the conditions were next right in November of 2024 when the next election cycle that was pretty brutal made it clear that fact checking was already a tough business to be in, but
Or
um,
impossible, depending on who you talk
yeah,
to.
the fact checking nonprofit space became much harder to fund as a result of the election in
Yeah.
2020. I understood that I was probably going to lose my job. Not to say that the work isn't important. Obviously, it's important. It's just harder to fund given creeping global fascism, right? And it's
Yeah.
bad business. And so I ended up starting to look like what's the next thing I'm going to do. I knew that Blue Sky had been a thing since the white paper in 19, and or since some sort of like website introducing the idea at a very high level. And I had an account since very early on in early 23. And Blue Sky was starting to pick up all of this steam as a sort of reaction to the election results in 24. And I went over there and took a look at, first off, I just looked at their jobs page because I was like, I need a job.
Yeah.
Probably I need a job soon. And I applied for the algorithm engineer role that they had listed. I didn't hear back at all, but I was like, I might as well just kind of play out the idea. And worst case, it's an interesting portfolio piece of thinking about what does a maximalist version of an algorithm engineer look like.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so yeah, the process was I saw this post for this job, applied to it, and then also started just independently thinking about what does this job mean and what is the maximalist, what's the theory here? Why are they hiring an
Yeah.
algorithm engineer? And so I looked at the spec for the API and they had this thing called a custom feed, which
Mm-hmm.
kicked off this manic like 3-day like design bender where I sort of put together this like crazy idea all very quickly of this custom feed, this humble custom feed affordance on this platform is actually like a backdoor for a global reorientation of the attention economy. And in this, it's like an agent of like potentially rewiring how information works online. And I built this like really insane grand narrative around it and how you could use it to do that, put out a blog post about it and articulated a path for a product, and people bought into it really quickly, and we gained a lot of steam, and we were able to raise around this theory. And now I think, I'm not sure if this is the case. I've asked a couple of friends that are like much more knowledgeable about this, but I think Graze is the largest third party product in federated social media ever. So first parties would be, your Nosters or Farcasters or Mastodons or Blueskys, right? I think we're the largest product that's been built on top of one of those ecosystems, one of those platforms.
That's really cool. So I think I want to break down some stuff for folks in the audience who might not be up on all of the decentralized social networking. I think everybody's probably heard of Facebook. That's probably the big social network everyone's kind of familiar with. Twitter, I think probably most people still remember, that was bought and rebranded as X. And then Bluesky came along somewhere before it was bought and sold, before Twitter was bought and sold, as kind of an alternative in a non-federated or federated model that was built around a protocol versus a service. And so like the big difference with Bluesky, I would say, in Twitter and or like Instagram is something people are probably familiar with too, is that the company who builds it decides what you see and how you see stuff. And so your feed is whatever somebody at the company decides, and then they typically put ads in there to sell stuff so they keep the service going. Bluesky has kind of a basic feed, I guess, part of it, but it's really built around the idea that you get to pick your feed. And the way I understand it is like the way that the feeds that you pick is effectively like your own social algorithm, and you can build that yourself or you can get it from other people. Is that right? Like, and so
that's right.
Your
Yeah,
like
that's
homepage
right.
is kind of what you want it to be tailored, not like what is the rage bait of the moment, or like how do we know that you're going to stay on the app for 20 hours?
Exactly, right. And to give a sense of the history of these spaces, right? All of this stuff is really path dependent. And there's a history of technology story with all of it, right? Which is like Twitter started as a Ruby on Rails like toy project that like got out of hand. And so the entire like growth period of that platform was reactive design to constraints being forced on them by like people flooding the system, right? And intentioned, but not particularly carefully thought out in terms of what are the long-term interaction dynamics and consequences of what these like small contingent decisions are.
Scale too, like you're talking millions and I think billions of people at a certain point there were exposed to Twitter.
Yeah, and also like the effervescence of that period was so optimistic that like there was no real contention about like how could this shit go south in like 2006 to 2011. That was like the fifth topic.
It's interesting you say that, because it reminds me of the early days of the internet, where you had like BBS systems, bulletin board systems, where people would like log into a server and leave messages and trade stuff. And it was a small group of people who I would say were probably all ideologically aligned for the most part, and like open sharing, exploration, building things, giving it back to the community kind of thing. Twitter, I think, probably started that way, but then you get the mass flood of like literally everyone on the planet now engaging, and you have all sorts of other people with other motivations. But the underlying principle is that everyone's nice and everyone wants to get along and just share what they're doing, right? Like, how cool is that?
Yeah, and there was like I spent a lot of time in academia thinking about this stuff. There was a 2-year sort of like failed project that I was doing. I wouldn't say it was a failure in that we didn't produce anything like huge from it, but like it was a success in that this guy Zach and I spent a ton of time like thinking about what is the theory of like rage and like the outrage machine in 14 and 15. And like one of the things I reach to for this stuff is like a forest fire analogy. And this is like very common in like physics spreading models, right? Where it's, if you have these break lines, right, between patches of forest, right, the the fire can only spread so far, or if there's only so many trees, right? And there's the sparsity of this graph of trees is, if it's sparse enough, right?
Yeah.
You don't actually get endemic forest fires that spread across the entire map,
They'll
right?
burn in pockets, the rest of little spots here and there, but the forest by and large stays relatively unimpacted.
Yeah, and like the like toy model physics like magic trick is that after you pass this level of sparsity, right, you go from the transition, you rapidly transition from everything's cool and like fires like are pretty well constrained by the sparsity and nothing ever blows up,
Yep.
to like all of the sudden the system is like blowing up over and over and over, right?
That's like the high wind analogy, right?
Yeah.
Where now all of a sudden you have a wind and you can push the sparks or the flame past that break and now burn the other parts of the forest.
Yeah. Yeah. And the theory of the platforms, one theory of the platforms is that they have all of these incentives to, have us engage with each other in tighter and tighter loops in, increasing context collapse with one another, right? And as a result, like the design of the system is to encourage forest fires as much as possible. It's good for business, right? Both in terms of it creates all of this rage, but also just like more fundamentally, like it's just part of the system. Like the system requires constant engagement, right? And that's the substrate that like creates the thick forest in this analogy, right?
And that's something I talk a lot about on the podcast in general. I don't get into like technical words and stuff, so I think that was a really great technical explanation. And just to maybe tie together with people, I was writing earlier about, I launched an app, folks have heard about it, it's doing pretty good, and I'm reflecting on kind of the first quarter. And one of the things that I found that was so interesting is that I get a lot of positive feedback from folks. Like they write into support and they're like, hey, I love this thing, or hey, I love this thing, it would be great if it did this thing, or have you thought about doing these things? And for folks, I think it's really easy to think about, like, how often are you so happy with something that you actually like do something about it, or do you just feel good? If you're angry about something, you're going to find someone to complain to, you're going to write somebody an email, you're going to call the phone number for someone, and someone has to fix your problem, and you're really motivated by it. And it's the same way with social media. Is you're much more likely to engage, meaning you're using the app or you're staying on the service, if you're mad about stuff, and you got to go tell everyone how mad you are, right? So it's not only as like this tweet that Devin tweeted made me so mad, I'm going to share it to all my friends and be like, this is why I'm mad about this thing. And then not only am I propagating the anger and the rage, I'm also propagating potentially your crappy idea or your false information.
Totally.
And it works really well.
Yeah. And this also, a lot of this stuff also dovetails with Tim Wu's work around like how platforms have these like structural incentives to basically jokerize in this way, right? And this is not, it's not a bug, it is like a structural fiduciary sort of feature of these systems where they must do this eventually, right? All platforms have to do this thing. I'm not quite as black-pilled as Tim Wu is on this stuff, where I think to really be fast and loose with it, I'm re-listening to one of his books right now on my bike rides. But that it is in some ways like a one-way ratchet, right? Where platforms must do this. This is the nature, the life and death of platforms. Like the only respite is that other platforms will come in to fill the void as the other platform, the predating platform jokerizes past a certain threshold, and the market,
and people move. And that's kind of what happened with Twitter, right? Is that it evolved. There was all sorts of decisions. If people are interested in this, there's a really good HBO. It's like a 2-part documentary, or maybe it's 4 parts. It's not very long, but it's like long for a documentary. It's like 3 hours, but they broke it into episodes, and it's on HBO, I believe. And I'll try to remember to link to it. But they talked through 2 of the 3 founders of Twitter about what happened, how did it grow, like and like everyone I think kind of knows the story of how it grew up, or at least in tech. And then, but it's like after that, like 2009, 2010 era where they really like got popular and money started coming in and they had to figure out how to make money and like, what do you do? Like it was chaos. It was the fail whale era for folks who remember that. Very, very interesting documentary. And it's interesting so that, that then it became kind of a cesspool, and it still kind of is a cesspool. And then X happened and there was a bunch of feelings about that. A bunch of new product decisions, we'll say, that changed the course of what is incentivized on the platform. But around that, earlier before that happened, we were talking a little bit about Blue Sky kind of cropped up. And the idea behind these, Mastodon, you mentioned Nostr, for folks who don't know, they're decentralized protocol based systems, but the underlying protocol nobody owns and everybody collaborates on, which facilitates the exchange of information. That's how the internet's designed. Nostr, Mastodon, Blue Sky operate under that simple principle or similar principle. And they also, most of those are backed by companies, entities, nonprofits that have like the core first service, but you can spin up your own server. I hope that makes sense for folks because it's so abstract that people don't understand. Like the phone system is the same way. Like if you have AT&T or Verizon or some other carrier, they all have their own kind of system. You get a different voicemail, you get, different text messaging, call waiting stuff, but it all uses the phone number that everyone else has, and you can call anyone you want on that phone number.
Yeah, the wager here, to be really specific about the technical mechanism, I think, is so the language for this is called credible exit, right? So the idea that if a platform provider jokerizes, it should be easy to move your data, the representation of the data of your account, to some other provider that is directly fungible, right? Or more or less directly fungible. You should be able to vote with your feet. And on the other side of the ledger is network effects, right? So platforms have network effects. Facebook and Twitter are not federated in the sense that you can't take your set of relationships and connections and put them on some other server to register your displeasure with Facebook by basically removing their ability to control your information, while still being able to enjoy the benefits of the global social network or fabric that Facebook represents, right?
It gives them tremendous control also over how things work.
Yes, and the VC playbook for these businesses is to subsidize the company until these network effects are so baked in that there is no way to escape the platform. It becomes a collective action failure problem so that nobody can ever escape it, and we are on Facebook forever. That is very intentionally the design of these systems.
100%. And unfortunately, it works really well because nobody wants to go on Andrew's federateduniverse.com because it's only Andrew, right? And then maybe a couple of Andrew's friends, whereas on Twitter, there's millions of people and there's already content there too. I think that's another hard part of this is like maybe the service is better, but like all your friends are there. You understand it. There's also a huge context switch of just changing things. People are
it's intractable. It's intractable in the way that like climate change is intractable, right? These are these collective failures where I can decide to opt out of the fossil fuel industry entirely in my personal life, but then the extreme version is I'm also growing my own food with fertilizer I produce at home, right? And like there are limits living in the sort of structure and a capitalist nightmare that we exist in, right? Like there are limits on what I can practically do to opt out of that arrangement, right?
Into effect, and I think the parallel is there too. You're still impacted by climate change. If everyone's driving their Hummer around and the climate's getting worse, you can't grow your food as well, or your food doesn't grow as big. And the same is true for Twitter, Facebook, all these other platforms where you might not interact with it, but everyone you're interacting with is getting more upset or more rageful or starts to have all these crazy ideas that are not based in reality or fact. And then that slowly winds its way into the fabric of society. And that's this online offline divide that I talk about sometimes and it's such a slow problem that it's really, really hard to see. And now we're in it. And it's like, how do you unroll that? Right.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So
that's
yes,
the jokerification idea. We can't just go to a different reality yet.
Yeah.
maybe,
Yes.
maybe soon.
This is all the sort of stuff that I was weighing again in my aforementioned 3-day manic bender. So I don't think my company is a panacea to solve this. That would be foolish and silly.
Right.
But I do think that some of the aspects of the design of our product are built to intentionally start undoing this ratcheting effect by sort of like moving some of the chess pieces around on how like the attention economy is oriented to attenuate these effects or make it possible for people to easily escape these effects. What do I mean by that? So let's see here.
Before we jump in, we've talked about Graze. We've talked about kind of, I think, the meta context around
Sure.
why you're there. But what is Graze? Like, what do you do?
That's a great question. Ask me all these silly questions when all I want to do is talk about the theory of the attention economy. Okay, so Graze is so there is this thing called a custom feed on Bluesky. We've established that. The idea is that if you do not like the algorithm that the platform provides to you, you are technically enabled through the architecture of Bluesky to go start your own server, build and run an API endpoint, build and operate an API endpoint that responds in a very particular way when it receives requests from Bluesky's servers, such that when someone says, I want to use Devin's feed, they can click on that feed in their phone, their Bluesky app, or some other third-party app, or the Bluesky website, or whatever, or just directly through the API. And they will get back a legible set of posts from that feed at that time for that person that is requesting that, the authenticated user that's requesting that content.
So for folks who might not know Bluesky, or it's when you open your app, Instagram, Facebook, whatever kind of social app you want, you usually get some kind of a home. There's information there from other people in the app about stuff in a broad sense. Bluesky lets you customize that to yourself or choose how you want to see information from the app, whereas all these other companies choose for you. And the motivation for them is to usually sell you ads and to keep you trapped in the system so that you create more content that then they use to sell ads and make tons of money, which is why a lot of these social media companies have billions and billions of dollars and make everybody mad. I don't know what else to say, right? Like,
yeah.
It's pretty bad. But so Bluesky is different, and then Graze was a way for people to create and exchange custom feeds effectively, right?
Yes.
Or is there more?
Yeah. So yeah, there's a bit more. So the at a high level, Bluesky is providing this breakout box where you can run your own feed, right? They've given this like technical breakout box. You can do this thing. Anybody can run one of these servers. The problem is that these servers cost real money to run. They require care and feeding. Algorithms are not easy to build, all of this sort of stuff.
And a lot of people don't want to do it. I'm very technical. I don't want to do it.
Totally.
I would use it. But I don't want to build it myself.
Exactly. And there's also like the number of people that have the circle of people that know how to run one of these servers and the circle of people that have good ideas of what an alternate theory of attention looks like on the internet is like it's not an overlapping circle, right? These things should be made accessible to more people. So yeah, we provide this tool that allows non-coders to use what is essentially like a Photoshop for algorithms that we designed. Under the hood, obviously, it's represented as a JSON structure. For the real nerds out there, it looks like Elasticsearch as like a language. We built like a really thin syntax, custom syntax. And so users can use all of these different like palette tools to say content from these types of people, content that looks like this, content that looks like that, et cetera. And they can nest those recursively with ands and ors and nots to be able to create sort of whatever structure they're looking for in a feed. The idea is, in this very MVP primitive design, but we want to give non-coders, or even I guess coders, the ability to shape a feed using like a simple syntax or expressive language. And the output is we manage all of the other stuff end to end. They don't have to think about any of the other guts of how it runs.
It's not just designing what I want to see, but then I have to have a server that puts it all together and then puts it in the app for me.
And runs 24/7 and can do all of this other pagination stuff and gives you analytics and all of this other annoying stuff, right? There's economies of scale that are real and beneficial here if there is like a shared resource that does this sort of thing.
100%.
Okay, so there's a very basic sort of simple SaaS business where it's like feeds are a cool artifact on this platform. We make it easy to build feeds. But the move here is to get really expansive with the vision and really like push past just like somebody needs to build a hosted feeds tool. That's like a very basic sort of question. I think the bigger interesting thing is how do you use it as a vehicle for rewinding all of these deleterious effects of the attention economy? And so the next thing that I have to solve in this design is, okay, so we have this thing that allows you to run these feeds. I don't have to think about it. I'm a non-coder. Great. I had a great conversation with an area luminary here in town who's been in tech forever and has been very close to the ground with like social media stuff. And I did like a pre-mortem with him when I was starting to work on this product before I'd even raised money. And I said, okay, it's 3 years from now and Blue Sky is dead. The theory of attention failed. Why? Like, why does Blue Sky end up dying? What kills it? And
this is an excellent idea for anyone to run who's in like pre-market fit or even just kicking around ideas. Is like,
yeah, super valuable.
Opposite side. Why would it fail? And maybe you fix it, maybe you move on.
Yeah. And so like actually spending time in that like uncomfortable spot produced a much more interesting product, which was, okay, so his theory was Blue Sky fails because it fails to get off of the VC train early.
Yeah. How do you make money?
And this is the same, this is the woo stuff, right? Where it's like platforms will eventually jokerize, even platforms that are open. And credible exit is like an interesting theory, but it's also just, it's an invitation towards solving some of these problems. It doesn't actually solve the problem inherently and inexorably, right? You could imagine, let's make a trivial sort of base case here, right? Which is tomorrow, Facebook decides that it wants to be part of the protocol, right?
Yeah.
My 97-year-old grandmother is not going to move her account to a different personal data store because of her opinion about the problematic data governance rules at Facebook. And Facebook will continue to pollute the ecosystem. And at best, we'll get a couple percent of people that really care about these things on the margin to leave. Yep. And they will continue to have basically more or less the same negative effect, right? Credible exit is like necessary but insufficient to create a better internet. Yep. Is my sort of like core theory. It's very like technological, deterministic, like libertarian approach of like, you can move your account, so we've solved the problem. We've solved all problems related to like the sociology of like attention.
And it's in a false escape hatch for accountability of what your platform's doing. You can just move if you don't like it, but there's always costs associated with that. There's skills you might need. And I hear this a lot. I've worked in the Valley, as people have heard on the podcast too. And I see this argument all the time. It's like, you vote with your dollar. But the problem is a lot of these companies are also monopolies, and there is no alternative, or there's no real alternative. If you vote
with my face,
no one's there, right? And the value of that platform isn't there. And so by having an open protocol and having a decentralized platform, like that actually solves a lot of those problems. Yeah, it's still hard.
Yeah. And federation is an invitation to solve these problems. It is not solving these problems. Those are very different things. And there's a conflation with those being, there's like a false equivalence, right? Anyways, the idea was if credible exit is this sort of like hard power, like necessary but insufficient part of the solution, there also has to be this like soft power complement to it that directly contends with what is the vehicle, like what is the economic vehicle of this ecosystem, and how do we get the platform, this entire ecosystem, to think differently about monetization and to get off of the VC treadmill as quickly as possible. Right? Because if 3 years in, it's still completely VC fueled and there's no theory of an economy that's native, we're staring down the barrel of like a situation where it will just get squeezed by private equity eventually, right? There will be some reckoning, right? Yep. Every additional fundraising round presumes a 10x in the economy that must be realized in order for it to work, right? At minimum.
People are willing to give you money for the promise of making more money in the future.
Yeah, this isn't benevolence, right? And so, so it wasn't enough to build like a SaaS, we build your feeds for you thing. It also had to natively, immediately from day zero, have a theory of a very clear articulated theory of monetization. Like, how is an economy going to work with this platform such that it is default alive and able to be independent, not require a bunch of care and feeding from VCs. And so the theory that I had was the lingua franca of the internet, right? The way that the internet is monetized is through ads. Do I like ads? No. Is it legible to billions of people? Yes. Would I have to coordinate the decision of billions of people to accept a payment structure that would be different? Yes. So we're going with ads because that's how these things work already. That's how every other economic actor coming into this space is going to presume how it works. And so it's like, okay, then we have ads, but then our company is just reproducing. We're taking the platform problem. If we run ads in other people's feeds and take all of the money, we are reproducing, we're like moving the problem of like platform control off of Bluesky's moving it off of like Facebook. And then we're still saying Facebook is still, Bluesky is still going to potentially jokerize. So now we move it off of them. And there's this shell game where it's still not really solving the core problem. And so our theory was the feed operator should be actor that is responsible for making all of the decisions about how the feed gets monetized. If the feed gets monetized, they should take the lion's share of the money that's going through it. And without telling our VCs, long term, the goal should be to create an open protocol of like actual direct economic exchange so that the ad network is also an open participatory ad network so that we are also decentered from this. So that anybody could run their own ad brokerage, any of these feed operators. These feed operators become the default source of incoming revenue into the ecosystem, and they collectively become a powerful sort of like counterweight. If you think about the closest analogy in social has been the way that like Reddit is run by Reddit moderators, but they're toothless to a considerable degree because they don't actually own the means of production. They are,
like a serf system almost.
It's a serf system. Yeah, it's a serf
pleasure of the owner or the lord.
Yeah, you work on the you do volunteer efforts, volunteer labor for a billions-dollar company that takes all of your custodial work of making these spaces legible and brand safe, and they just make money off of the backs of all of this labor, right? And so every once in a while, there's these like pushback moments that Reddit, like the Reddit moderator class engages in, where they'll do these Reddit blackouts in protest of different policies from Reddit, the company. And so this sort of theory that I was putting together is, what if Reddit blackouts had like economic teeth, right? And in this like grand vision, right, a feed operator becomes the sort of economic source of the attention economy in this platform. And they are like a collective sort of union of individuals that can vote with dollars in a way that is not possible in any other part of the attention economy, where they can hold both myself to account, but also the platforms that they serve to account. Long term, in a mature version of this ecosystem, Bluesky, the platform, is totally disentangled from distribution of content. They're not the ones that decide on what the content distribution routing looks like, the algorithm layer of a platform. They deal with the data governance and they deal with keeping the lights on. They're running the electricity grid. They're not saying you need to use, in your house, you run this type of oven, right? There's like the separation of concerns of infrastructure, right?
And I like this model too, because the alternative, like extreme libertarian model, is effectively like, and then there's no checks and balances or control, and then you just have a bunch of random feeds that don't ever produce any value, which is, I think, where a lot of these projects end up, is that you get really tiny, weird niches of things that most people aren't interested in. So you never get a mass appeal, and then they all kind of fluctuate because there's no economics to,
and you want
real money to do this stuff.
Yeah, you want that long tail of experimentation and weird stuff that's not monetizable, but you also want the incentive structure that says, if you want to make a multi-million-dollar business running your slice of the attention economy, you should be empowered to do so. And the theory is like, how do we create these like durable new parties in these ecosystems that are able to hold platforms to account in qualitatively new ways that attenuate the network effect problem? If there is a voting block, like again, in this mature ecosystem, these feed operators are generating all of the money, and like the long-term probable business structure is that they are paying some sort of gas fees for running on this open network to the infrastructure companies, right? And there's like a net neutrality of sorts at this new higher layer of abstraction of the internet. The same sort of theory of what makes IP, TCP/IP, a workable global economic engine, is just abstracted now to this other layer where instead of concerning ourselves with the transmission of packets, we are concerning ourselves with the transmission of skeets or likes or whatever, right? but literally the same sort of arrangement. And the idea would be if a platform jokerizes, they end up not just cannibalizing the good faith and credibility within their user base, they cannibalize their own bottom line directly by these people that actually own the capital being able to say, no, you actually have to answer to me.
Yeah, you tap into the kind of self-preservation system of the economic viability, right? I want to keep making money, so I have some sort of incentive to not make this absolutely crazy, and other
Yes.
people have an incentive to leave if it gets absolutely crazy, which hedges against the like black market effect or the black marketification of illicit trade, so to speak, which is
Yeah.
also a problem with a lot of these kind of systems.
Yeah, and then there's also one other really interesting piece is that these feeds are in open competition amongst themselves.
Yep.
Okay. And there's also like there's not a super big moat for designing these feeds. And there's some ways that I could see a moat emerging where like somebody has a durable edge with an algorithm, but anybody can come in and try to build one of these countervailing algorithms. And I think the interesting piece there is that the users, the readers, also get to vote with their feed, right? Where if a feed, okay, now we haven't solved, we've attenuated the enshittification at the platform layer,
Yeah.
right? We now have this other smaller surface area enshittification within like an intra feed enshittification move, right?
Yep.
A feed gets so popular and so dominant that it can start engaging in dark patterns, right?
Right.
Other people can design feeds and readers can move to whatever feeds that they want to within this open marketplace of feeds. The theory, and this is still a little hand wavy, but I think is more credible than what the alternatives are, certainly more credible than what the existing alternatives are,
Yeah.
is the users can say, this feed is no longer serving me. This is not healthy for me. And there is someone here that says, I'm running a very similar feed, but with fewer ads,
Yep.
right? Or I'm running a very similar feed, but I'm explicitly removing anything that looks ragey from the feed. And so people get to actually move with their feet and punish players that try to jokerize intra feed, right?
Well, and you can also have both, and you can compare, and you can see how the feed is different. And
Yes.
people talk about this with news sources, and like at least in the United States, they're not really much of a difference between Fox and CNN and whatever MSNBC is today.
Yeah.
They're all kind of variations of the same thing. They have a different political slant, but they're really not that different. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of like a false choice, and you can see it if you watch all of them, but most people don't. Whereas this is opens that up. You could say, I really like the news coverage on CNN, but I want less politics, or I want more sports, or I want whatever your kind of thing is, and that
Yeah.
can be possible.
Exactly.
Or you could make your own, right? I really want this feed, but I want to kind of tweak it the way I want it.
Yes. And that's our sort of North Star with the product is if credible exit is this hard power invitation to fixing the attention economy, we want to be the soft power complement that solves how do you actually put in place the durable sociological mechanisms that make that contract real and actionable within the existing economy. Something that like a normal user could probably use, and also like Pepsi could spend money on, because I care if Pepsi spends money in this platform personally. I'm not waking up, in the morning
Pepsi
saying,
bluesky
God,
feed.
yeah, how do I increase shareholder value for PepsiCo through engaging experiences, right? But that is the language of how these systems end up working at scale. So we have to use the tools that.
And there are people who really enjoy Pepsi who might resonate with what Pepsi wants to show them, and that's their choice. Whereas today, you just get an ad, and if you click on the ad or have some sort of attention on the ad, you get more ads, but it's a passive engagement as well, and you don't even get to choose. Like, there is an argument for being able to choose what advertising you're subjected to, which I think you're hitting on a little bit too. A lot of the platforms do that though, and they just use that to enrich their data that they then in turn to sell. And yeah, I guess you get better ads, but
yeah, and this I think that's another really important piece is like we give complete editorial control over ads to the people that are at the edges of these systems, right? The people that are actually running these feeds. They are people that understand their community. They understand the normative structures of what is reasonable and allowed, right? And that in and of itself is another sort of like interesting chess move of dealing with all of the problems of like terrible ad placements that advertisers hate, right?
Exactly.
You don't want to be associated with certain brands and behaviors, right? And this is a way of like coordinating the fix for that problem.
Well, and advertising isn't advertising either, right? There's levels of this. And from a customer of an ad network or from like a corporate perspective, I want people to engage with my product. So I want, targeted ads is what we usually call. But if you have this kind of ecosystem where everybody in the feed is like really bought in, that's a much more valuable advertising segment because people are more likely to actually engage with your ad or even buy your product, which is the end result of advertising.
Yes, exactly. And I wanted to hit on one other aspect here, which I think is like an interesting big brain theory of attention that's like emergent. And it also dovetails nicely with some of the IPM work, which is, and it was a thing. Whenever I talk to a VC about this stuff, I always get this question of, okay, but how does AI change all of this, right? Yeah. What's the AI angle? What's
the magic letters?
Yeah, and you have to do this all the time, right? It's part of the
Is Graze an AI company now?
I don't know. We run a bunch of machine learning inference at scale, right? Yep. We adjudicate something like we make 100,000 decisions a second, 24/7, awesome. Roughly, on should this post go into this feed. Mm-hmm. And we're running it at this ridiculous scale where the input are these algorithmic manifests. There's an argument of an algorithm is an agent, right?
That's effectively what an agent is, right? It's just a more adaptive baby algorithm.
Yeah, we have a very primitive agent architecture, right? Yeah. And then obviously there's a bunch of ML stuff that's happening where we're running a ton of models against the constant stream of content that's coming through the platform. Like down to, we run Whisper on every single video so that we can get audio transcriptions so that we can offer, what is in this video so that people can make really cool video feeds, right? So there's a ton of work that goes into it that's AI related. But I think the more interesting high vision theory of what is the AI angle is, and this ties back to the IPM stuff, persuasion machines, folks, is basically, if we think about, if international persuasion machines was talking about normative violations of systems as a cybersecurity problem, right? The shape of cybersecurity is like a constant cat and mouse, yep. Right? And red teams are always beating blue teams, are always beating red teams, and so on and so forth forever, right? Let's say that as AI tooling gets more sophisticated, the ability for red teamers in the attention economy normative game are figuring out increasingly compelling ways to attention hack the world. And these tools deployed out to the edges of these platforms to end users that are trying to do this attention hacking is outstripping the capacity of centralized actors to be able to push back against it. These tools are outpacing the ability to deal with the slopification of platforms. And I think one really interesting data point that illustrates this is, insofar as product pronouncements are essentially like policy statements from the big platforms, right? You see a lot of motion from the platforms that all basically indicate that they are giving up on playing red team, blue team against AI slop, right? Instagram is like, fine, fake accounts, right? We'll
just label it, self-label, it's fine.
Yeah, we'll create slop accounts on the platform that are created by Meta that you can talk to grandpa, the slop grandpa.
That's great branding. I wish they marketed it that way.
Yeah, and so I think all of this sort of motion from the big platforms, the grokification, Twitter, right? All of this stuff these are basically admissions of guilt that there is no long-term way to resolve the slopification of platforms. They can't get ahead of it. And so the only theory is go through it and just face the slop.
I feel like it's I've talked about this quite a bit on the podcast too. It's really hard to do this stuff, but it's doable. And I feel like it's just an admission of we don't want to try. And so we're just going to run into it. Like, how do you prevent a kid from being on, Instagram before they're 13? It's impossible. Well, no, there's actually quite a few ways you can solve that problem.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways you can solve that problem without having a picture of your child uploaded to the internet. But it's hard, and it promotes friction on the platform.
Yeah, it does not help.
Do that, right? And so we don't want to make it harder to use the platform. We don't want to make it harder to engage on our platform. We don't want to make it harder for us to sell ads. So we're going to just let it happen, and we're going to make it easy to do, I guess, is kind of Meta's take on this from what I understand. So I guess real quick too, for folks who don't know what red teaming and blue teaming and all that stuff, it's red teaming is typically adversarial, people trying to do nefarious things or hack into your system. Blue teaming tends to be the people who are trying to prevent it. And with AI, a lot of folks, I don't know that I necessarily agree, but I'm pretty close to agreeing that there's going to be just so much crap that it's like there's so much noise, and it's so easy to generate it with AI that it's going to be incredibly difficult to identify like actual people, actual activity, actual content. And so you're saying that it seems like the platforms are just saying, yeah, it's too big of a scale problem, or we don't care, so we're just going to lean into it.
Yeah, the platforms are declaring slop bankruptcy, right?
Yeah.
That's the theory of the future of the attention economy and information online is slop bankruptcy. Fuck it,
Yeah.
slop it. And
so that bumper sticker before.
And so I think what's particularly interesting, it took me a really long time to figure out what the AI angle is.
Yeah,
right?
It's a really interesting angle.
But the angle is that the way that you are able, the only viable, if they are declaring bankruptcy on this, the only viable path is, and this is very classic engineering stuff.
Yeah.
If the cost of doing something in a centralized clearinghouse is too high,
yep.
right? The solution is to distribute the load of the problem, right? That's the way that you solve for this, right? And so what I see here, again, as a builder of a hammer, I'm seeing a nail-shaped problem, right? But I do think that there's something interesting around a future of, so like this, as the slop increases and as the slopification inundates the ability to be informed, the value chain of the attention economy shifts from creators to curators, because there is now even more information or even more content out there than there was before. And so the ability to like navigate it becomes increasingly valuable. And so I think that there is a sketch of a vision here of as a two-sided market that provides individual curators that have the ability to know. And it's very similar to something else. A friend of mine, Tony Hale, who started a company called Chartbeat and is running a new company called Filament. He and I were talking recently, and he said, I was like, what do you do as an engineer, like in this moment, right? Like we're all as engineers, we're all outmoded. And he was like, as the cost of software goes to zero, like the value of an engineer shifts towards like their tastes, right? Yeah. It's very similar to this.
Judgment and taste, yeah.
Right. And so judgment and taste is my value as an engineer used to be my ability to create code. My value now is the ability to know the sense of what code is worth it, right? To create the code of the massive token blast that I could generate in any direction, knowing which direction is most viable and most important right now and what makes sense right now is the value. And so I think there's a future here where the collective sense-making efforts of hundreds of thousands of people that are subject matter experts building their own algorithms, maintaining high quality streams of information in things that they understand, providing that as a service, as a small business to exposed as feeds today, right? Because that's the sort of legible attention economy unit today, but exposed as MCP endpoints or API endpoints in the future so that like they
trusted knowledge sources for AI to either use or train on or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. Like these they become like these small businesses that are basically collectively in charge of doing all of the sense making for the real world downstream, right? And that's in all sorts of products, right? Not just social media apps, Bloomberg terminals.
Yeah, and I think the way to like illustrate this too is that this is already how a lot of industries work. Like healthcare is a great example. You go to a doctor, the doctor has general medical knowledge, but they specialize, right? If you have something with your skin, you go to a dermatologist. If you have something with your heart, you go to a cardiologist. And I think an interesting take on the feed and information world is then those people will now become the custodians of their knowledge base that will then feed into this AI monstrosity. It's like a version of the future.
Yeah, and this is like I think it is a cleaner synthesis of how do we maintain a system that is informative. Like I fundamentally have to believe, and there's probably people that work at Meta that do not believe this, but I think there is value to novel information that is real.
100%, yeah.
And I think there's an interesting synthesis of these machines that are able to generate plausible bullshit being directly tied with these human in the loop operations that provide the raw constructive materials to sense make, right? And sort of ground this new engine that we're playing with in reality, in real current information. I think that's the more durable long-term future of information.
No, I don't disagree at all. And I've said quite a bit on the podcast too, but it's like these things aren't creative. It's a set of algorithms, it's a heuristic, it's a model. There's all sorts of verbiage for it. It's not intelligent and it is artificial. Right. But and like what is intelligence? And so I usually define that as the ability to create something. And again, I think it's an interesting point you make that the big companies have just kind of set up too hard.
It's not that it's too hard. It's that it's illegible to the fundamental economic structure of these companies as they were built 20 years ago, right? Yeah. They are increasingly contorting themselves to be contemporary shaped. And
I like that. Analogy.
It's the same. There's a reason that like Cray computer is not like a household name now, right?
Yeah. Ironically, still a company and still building supercomputers, which is for folks who don't know, they were like the OG supercomputer manufacturer, and now they are basically like a contractor who builds supercomputing.
It's weird. Yeah, it's very cool stuff. Extremely not to shit on Cray or anything by any means.
But they're not a house. Everybody knew. It's like IBM. Like a lot of people don't even know what IBM is anymore.
Yeah, exactly. There's a different mode of production, and I think that we are on the cusp, or there is a moment here where there's a different theory of the production of information and a maintenance of attention in an economy, that there's an opening here to really revisit very fundamental things that I think collectively kicks over trillions of dollars of companies because they just fundamentally do not understand the moment that we are in.
It's a very I feel like once in a generational time to restructure how we do stuff. Or not. Yeah. And the concern I have is the or not piece where everybody just says, yeah, the status quo, and then we get Wall-E or some sort of dystopian future. And that's one of the reasons I have folks like you on the podcast, is to try to get these ideas out so people are reminded that we're in control of our own destiny, right? We get to choose what we want to do. We don't have to take the path that Meta wants for us.
Yes.
And I frankly think it's disgusting and horrific. People are into it, right? I mean, I'm pretty clear on, I try to play nice on the podcast, but there are some ideas that are just horrific. And there's a CEO of a certain AI company who I will not mention the name of, because I will not. They who shall not be named. This has been an awesome conversation. I'd love to have you back on to continue this in a few months. But is there anything you want to share with folks that you haven't shared already? Like, I always like to ask people, and it doesn't have to be about tech or social. It's like, are you watching something cool, reading something cool, or like just all the kind of fringe opinions I love to just try to collect with folks. And if not, that's cool too.
Sure. I'll give you one other weird speculative project that I did 8 years ago that reared its head this week. And I think is one of these like signposts that I think about this project all the time. And I'm always like, kind of like, I have a cron job in my head of watching to see if there's evidence of it behaving, the information ecosystem behaving in this way. And so it was the first time that I was just like dead on exactly the theory that I was trying to test acted out in the real world, which was, so this is the week of, today is April 29th. And this is the week after the White House Correspondents' Dinner shooting. And there was a post that was making the rounds this week, where about 3 years ago, an account on Twitter posted the first and last name of the shooter, nothing else. I believe this is like fourth or fifth hand now. I didn't like go look at the account, but I heard it on some podcast that it was literally the only thing the account had ever posted was just the name of the shooter, right? And the account's avatar is a Pepe. Okay.
Sure. For folks who don't know, that's like dark net 4chan lore.
Yeah, and associated with the far and groypers, whatever. If you really hate yourself, you can go do some research about that.
I would agree with that. I would take our word for it. You're probably not interested.
So I was working with a frequent collaborator 8 years ago on a conspiracy as a service system. Okay.
Yeah.
And the idea and our goal was that we wanted to just get it out on NPR. Like we wanted to see if we could make like a news splash with this like art project, not like we don't want to build a conspiracies as a service product that like, and this is,
we got enough of that on the internet.
Yeah, they call that the internet. But this was 2018, right? So very before the current state of the art in terms of being able to extract anything off of the internet. But our theory was that the denominator of content, as the denominator of content on the internet explodes, it becomes the probability that there is a retrievable numerator so as to undergird or provide the foundation for any belief in any conspiracy in any way approaches 1, right? And because there is simply billions and billions and billions of pieces of content, you have the monkey's Shakespeare phenomenon. And if you are able to be selective in what you draw out of that haystack, you can create post hoc a conspiracy or belief about anything, right? And so one of the core engines of that conspiracy as a service was to do like direct searching for exact strings before an event happened that are also highly specific to the event, right? And so when I saw that, it was just like it was like a very chef's kiss thing of this is exactly how the internet should be working, right? Given the structures that we've put in place, this is the machine doing what it has been built to do, for better or worse, right? And so I've been thinking about that a lot this week in terms of how easy it is for us to plausibly, falsely get pulled into these crazy directions, even well-intentioned people, right? Just because, and it's because of I don't know, some sort of cognitive bias of not being able to really appreciate just how massive.
And you can reason anything, and with enough information, fake or true or false or whatever you want to say, you will find patterns that will eventually prove what you're thinking, and that's a cognitive bias that all humans have. We're wired to find patterns, and eventually we will.
And we have built ourselves tooling that is like worlds more advanced than it was 8 years ago for supporting that effort. And we're still super behind the ball in being able to figure out how do we make a society that's resilient to this. It's like an open question, and there's not a lot of shareholder value in solving it often. So it doesn't get solved, and eventually, this is a commons that we are wasting, right? And so the question is, how far do we go down this? Make a climate change analogy, right? Like how far are we willing to pollute this ecosystem until it starts having these real existential threats? It already does have existential threats.
Yeah, and not to end on a dark note, but there's a self-correcting mechanism within humanity to change this, and it'll eventually happen, or we can choose not to do that. And people call it the outrage machine, and people are really hesitant to talk about, but it's like every revolution in the history of the world was started by things like this, where you either spread misinformation, you demonize a group of people, you create the so-called other, and then you make them the problem, and then you go them because they're the problem. And I would like us to not hit that stage of history. I'm serious. Like, I really don't want to see massive revolution, but this information shit and the social algorithms and all this stuff, like, it's so hard for people to grasp, and it's just been slow dripped into people that you can't solve a problem without understanding that it's a problem, and you can't even understand the problem until you understand the mechanism of what's going on.
Yes.
So
Great.
We will leave it there, right? We're going to go for a bike ride while we still can. And is there anything else, though, that you wanted to mention that we haven't talked about?
Oh God.
I gotta end on the golden question.
I don't know. I think that's the big stuff.
Yeah.
That's what's on top of mind this week.
All right. Thank you so much for attending here, and looking forward to having you back on and seeing what you're up to next.
Awesome. Thank you so much.